So, good day to all. Thank you so much for joining us for today's lecture on the importance of Sanskrit manuscripts in understanding the history of science by Professor Dominik Wujastyk, who is Saroj and Prem Singhmar Chair of Classical Indian Polity and Society at the Department of History and Classics at the University of Alberta, Canada. This is the inaugural lecture of a series initiated by the International Research Division at the India International Center, Delhi, Kriti-SAMHiTA, the Plurality of Indian Knowledge Systems. It forms part of a project, Samhita, South Asian Manuscripts, Histories and Textual Archive, which the IIC has started this year with the support of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Samhita's goal is to create a knowledge resource on manuscripts from South Asia that are now housed in libraries and private collections outside India. This would be an online platform that scholars all over the world
Yeah, something seems to have. Niharika, are you there? Okay, what I'll do, I think I'll take it on from there, Niharika, if you can hear me. Okay, so
it's fine again,
from our, yeah, my side is you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. So then greetings and welcome to everyone. And also welcome Dominik. I have known you for a long time. We have been you have been very supportive of the earliest into the National Manuscript Mission. And of course, we have drawn on your support even while we were talking about Samhita, and thanks a lot for all that. I'm so glad that you are the first one to be speaking here. And I'm not going to say good evening or good morning, because I think people are from different time zones.
Yes.
So, like Niharika said, I think a good day is a better option to start with. And like Niharika said, it's a very significant day. I would consider this a very important day for Samhita, because it is a new series of lectures that we are starting with this one. The Samhita, South Asian Manuscript Histories and Textual Heritage, started by IIC and also India International Center, Delhi, and supported, like she said, by the Ministry of External Affairs. Samhita, as everyone knows, is a Sanskrit term for compilation, collection. So this project seems to be working towards putting together a very comprehensive database and a web-based repository on the wealth of Indic manuscripts from collections from across the world by creating an informational database and also scanned copies of texts as a tool for advanced research in Sanskrit and other Indic knowledge systems. For this, we seek to create collaborations of manuscript repositories across the world, including universities, libraries, higher research institutions, and also I would like to say that this would complement the work of the National Manuscripts Mission, which is doing very important work for collecting and putting together a database and information resource on the manuscripts from India. So in a way, this will be something outside India. Though I'm saying when I'm talking about Indian and Indic, I don't mean this as a culture, as a political boundary at all. I mean this more as a cultural historical domain. For example, in this sense, countries in South Asia, even to some extent, Myanmar, Thailand, and Indonesia have had a shared history of textual heritage. From the early days of writing, manuscripts from India have traveled to regions in Central Asia and Southeast Asia, leading to a circulation of ideas and beliefs relating to the dissemination of religion and philosophy, exchange of scientific knowledge, and spread of narrative and hagiographical literature, including faiths such as Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, fields ranging from scripture and theology, logic and grammar, sciences like mathematics and astronomy, astrology, logic, chemistry, biology, medicine. All this, I think, I'm sure Dominik is going to talk about all this. I mean, he has also written a very significant essay on Indian manuscripts. If anybody has not read it, I think it is a wonderful informational resource for what it is that Indian manuscripts have to tell us. And so I would highly recommend that to everyone. So these disciplines have also produced a large number of texts, both primary and secondary, including what they variously call as sutras or aphoristic statements and samhitas, compilations, and also a lot of commentarial literature based on all that, sometimes representing different schools and perspectives, usually based on the same primary text. So through centuries, these texts multiplied, resulting in a large textual corpus. For example, David Pingree, the scholar who worked on exact sciences, I'm sure, again, I don't know whether I'm talking what Dominik is going to say in much more, with detail and length. He says that across the world, there are at least 30 million Indian manuscripts on Indian different aspects of Indian knowledge systems. So over centuries, various parts of the subcontinent had exchanges with regions in Asia in context of trade, pilgrimage, scholarly pursuits, and diplomacy. Texts in Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Tamil, Farsi, Arabic traveled between India, Tibet, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Iran, and Malaysia and Indonesia, stimulating in the creation of new knowledges and new ideas, influencing social institutions, even in countries without a direct contact, for example, Russia and Japan. So neighboring countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, China have unearthed many manuscripts. To give an example, for example, is the Gilgit manuscript that are found in the Gilgit region bordering India and Afghanistan, which is actually a collection of Buddhist literature. So these manuscripts that are found dispersed in the world, fragmented and dispersed in the world, many scholars have tried to compile them according to regions, according to domains, according to age. So and made a kind of catalog to be made accessible to a larger world of scholarship. For example, the present day scholars owe a lot to stalwarts like David Pingree, whom I mentioned earlier, K.V. Sharma, to bring back this knowledge of Indian manuscripts, and also those who have documented them diligently, as Theodore Rothschild, who compiled the catalogue of Sanskrit manuscripts at Harvard University, in the Trinity College in Cambridge, Florence in Italy, and other places. There are also others, for example, Pearson, J.D. Pearson, H.I. Coleman, who has done the census of Indic manuscripts in the United States and Canada, and also A. Weber in Berlin. And David Pingree himself had established the American Committee of South Asian Manuscripts in 1994 and documented information on several collections across universities. There are similar significant collections across Europe, in the UK, Germany, France, and other parts of South and Southeast Asia. Then, of course, in India, there is this exceptional Catalogus Catalogorum started by Dr. Raghavan, and also the new Catalogus Catalogorum, which is compiled and now it is revitalized by Professor Singhmar Das, started by the Madras University. So all these many initiatives are coming together now, including those from the USA, for example, the Penn Libraries, the Columbia University, and they all have cataloged their collections. Some have hand lists, some have much more. So, for example, recently there is something called database supported research, an entirely new development perhaps in South Asian studies, the Jaina prosopography at the Center of Jaina Studies in the SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. Then, of course, the Pandit prosopographical database developed and steered by Professor Yigal Browna of the Hebrew University, and also along with some other colleagues of his. These are actually major initiatives in this field. And Pandit, for that matter, is a supporter, and it is a partner of Samhita. So in this age of this kind of global connectivity, the larger idea behind Samhita is to recognize the plurality of our knowledge traditions. That is why it is called, even the Samhita lecture series is also called the plurality of knowledge traditions, and make this knowledge accessible and renewable in the next millennium, this coming millennium. The idea is to collaborate with institutions with Indic manuscript holdings and build on the work that is already done in this field. For this, we seek to create a database of Indian and South Indian texts available in other parts of the world, and make important manuscripts more widely accessible through the digital medium. Through this, we also try to say that manuscripts are not merely about specialized knowledge meant only for scholars, but they have also an impact on daily life with potential for an applicability and enjoyment in several ways. And we would like to show you how this happens in the course of this. I mean, how it is important that it's not just only scholars talking to scholars, but also in different domains, they do have perhaps a daily impact on our life and society also. So we are very delighted that today we have Professor Dominik Wujastyk to give the inaugural speech on the Samhita series. I cannot think of a better person than him, both in terms of his vast scholarship and also on the exact sciences, including medicinal systems, and also information on manuscript collections across the world. Like I said, I have drawn a lot from his expertise in my earlier stint at the National Manuscripts Mission, and also found him very, very liberal with his knowledge sharing and also very deep in his understanding in that sense. Dominik has a DPhil in Sanskrit from Oxford University and is trained in Pali and Prakrit languages as well. He has had stints at St. John's Research Institute, Bangalore, and the University of Vienna, before joining the University of Alberta as professor and Saroj and Prem Singhmar Chair of Classical Indian Polity and Society in the Department of Classics. His diverse interests include the history of medicine in India and South Asia, which is actually an active research area for him, the history of classical yoga in India, and aspects of early Indian Buddhism, out of which yoga arose. He has worked intensively on Kriti-SAMHiTA, a text on Indian medicine. For the last several years, he is committed to the Compendium of Suśruta, a treatise on classical medicine based on the Ayurveda system. Having unearthed the text in January 2007 through the Nepal-German project of Hamburg, he is now presently engaged in a comprehensive critical editions, translation, and studies in its transmission of the text. So through this new evidence on the text, he hopes that a new and fresh understanding will arise on South Asian medicine as such. I'm sure that Dominik will be talking more about this, and welcome to this lecture again, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopalakrishnan, especially for inviting me to give this talk. And let me turn the camera a little bit. So I'm really honored to be the first speaker in this series and very excited to be part of your project in bringing together knowledge and information that's going to be useful to everybody in the Samhita project. As you said, we've known each other for a long time since you became the first director of the Namami institution, the National Mission for Manuscripts, an organization which I know that we both feel a great deal of devotion and support towards that organization, and we admire its goals. And I hope that everything that the Samhita project does will contribute as well to all of that. So without further ado, I would like to share my screen and show some slides. Also, before I do that, can I just check with you how much time I have? Are you thinking 45 minutes, an hour, or something like that?
45 minutes is what we're thinking, but you could extend it if you need to. There is no hard and fast rule like that.
That's great. Thank you. That's perfect. Is that visible now, the yellow thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Actually, I think I might. I'm good. Just wondering which screen to have it on. It might be better if I shared a different screen. I'm sorry, this arrangement that we have here is a little different from the one I'm used to, because usually I have a lot of students and people that I need to sort of look at. So how do I do this?
But it's fine. It was looking fine now.
It was fine. Okay. The only thing is I'm looking sideways then. So not to worry. Let's do that anyway. At least we know that it works.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. Okay. So I would like to start by asking the question of what is Ayurveda, and more broadly, what is the history of science in India. And of course, this is a huge topic, and I can't really, I don't want to talk about it in depth today. I want to get to the manuscripts and talk specifically about the project that I'm working on with Sushruta. But we should just at least ask the question. So science, of course, is a concept that evolved, and the word science, which is from the Latin scientia, which just means knowledge originally, is a concept that has got more and more precise and refined, and has taken on, especially since the 18th century in Europe, has taken on this special meaning. But in ancient times, both in Europe and in India and China and other countries, there was no such kind of narrowly defined concept of science. People talked about knowledge and wisdom. Perhaps wisdom could be defined as the combination of knowledge and goodness. And so there were more general ideas about knowing the world. So when we talk about the history of medicine, the history of mathematics, and so on, in a way, we are projecting into the past our own interests. We are interested in physics, chemistry, mathematics, medicine, because they are so important to us today. So we naturally look to the past to find them. But in the past, what we find is a much more general, broader conversation about the world and about knowledge. And of course, in Sanskrit, we have the words like Vidya and Jnana and Shastra, which all define this. So you could say any Shastra is a science. I think that's really valid. It's a rigorous intellectual discipline. I personally think Vyakarana is a science, and Nyaya Shastra and many Shastras. We should also be interested in Krishi Shastra and in Vastu Shastra and other disciplines which have in modern terms a scientific dimension to them. And Ayurveda is, of course, as everybody knows well, the tradition of medicine in India. And of course, there are many kinds of medicine in India today and also in the past. And Ayurveda specifically means the scholarly, learned medicine that was in some way defined by the fact that it had two special things. One is a literature. It has many, many books. And secondly, it has a system. When Indian authors first began to write about Ayurveda, especially some Bengali authors at the end of in the early 19th century, they very often used the word system in the title of their books, Ayurveda, a system of medicine. And this word system is, I think, important as part of the definition of Ayurveda. And that in a way, that Ayurveda presents a model of the human being and how the human being works, even including those parts of the body that we cannot see, the inside of the body. It has a theory about how the body functions with food and digestion and the movement of liquids in the body and the arrangement of these doshas, the Vayu, Pitta, Kapha, and so on. And so that distinguishes it, Ayurveda, from, for example, folk medicine, which I would say is also very important, but folk medicine normally does not have a literature. The folk traditions are often passed down in families, and very often by the women in the families, granny's best kind of tea for a headache and so on. And secondly, with folk medicine, usually there's not so much theory that you have a headache, you take this plant, you take this herbal tea. It's a direct relationship between the ailment and the medicine, but there isn't a big theory behind it. You don't get into a big discussion about the balance and relationship of Vayu and Pitta or something like that. It's just direct illness and remedy. So there are parts of Ayurveda that are like that. For example, in the Kalpasthana, which is one of the sections of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA, it's devoted to poison and toxicology. So it's about the bites of spiders and rats and scorpions, and there's a lot about snake bite, poisonous snake bite. And in those chapters, we hear almost nothing about the system of Ayurveda, about the Tridosha theory. It's just, if this snake bites you, this is the symptoms. The patient will turn gray color and start to vomit. Give them this remedy. And there's very little theory. And it's interesting to ask the question, why is the Kalpasthana different in that way? Was it in the ancient times the textbook of a different group of people, maybe the Vishavaidyas, who worked in a different way and were not so, maybe because snakebite is very acute, maybe they were less interested in theory, or maybe even didn't have time for theory. And we have all sorts of questions arise about the history of these kinds of medicine. So, what are the books that we read when we are interested in Ayurveda? And actually, I have right beside me now a copy of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA. So here we have it. I don't know if it's in focus, but here's my trusty Sushruta. It lives beside me all the time. So when I want to read Sushruta, I normally would get this book, and it's published by Chautamba Orientalia in Varanasi, and this was printed in 2002. So I go to the shop and I buy this book, and I think of this as the Sushruta-SAMHiTA, and I've got it. It's in my hands. It seems to be very simple matter, not very complicated. You want to read Sushruta, go to the shop and buy a copy. And what I would like to help to explore today is how it's not so simple as it seems. So the first time that there was a book like this, the first time ever that something was printed on paper and that you could buy a copy the way I described, was at this time in 1835, when Madhusudana Gupta printed the Sushruta, or system of medicine taught by Dhanvantari, Sushruta-SAMHiTA, Sushruta, Ayurveda. It's a bit too small for me to read. Bhagavata, Dhanvantari, it's too small, I can't read it. Anyway, so I could blow it up a little. Yes, that's better. So this is the first publication of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA in print by the learned scholar Madhusudana Gupta, who lived in the first half of the 19th century and was a very interesting man. And people have written about him. There are many, many interesting historical aspects to his life and activities, but usually he's better known as somebody who was at the interface of traditional and 19th century, I won't say modern, but 19th century medicine. He was a teacher as well, a teacher of medicine. And he lived in Calcutta. So one of his activities was that he published this book. And if you turn to the beginning of this book, you'll see he doesn't say anything about where his text comes from. He just starts with Atha. It begins Atha, and off he goes into the beginning of the text. There's no introduction. So we have almost no information about what he did to make this book, which is a little bit regrettable, but it's an interesting fact that he didn't feel that was something he needed to do. So since the time of Madhusudana Gupta, the book has been printed a number of times, and a lot of people have looked back to Madhusudana Gupta's edition and copied it, which makes sense. And so it because it was the first, it was very influential. So we have a number of other editions and even the beginning of translations into Hindi and other languages in the later part of the 19th century. And by the time we get to the beginning of the 20th century, this great pundit, Yadava Sharman Trivikramatma Acharya, produced 3 editions of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA. I'm a great admirer of Vaidya Acharya. He was another person about whom one could speak for a long time, very influential, very great Vaidya. Eventually, towards the end of his career, he was the chairman of the Akhila Bharatiya Ayurveda Sammelan, the All India Ayurvedic Congress. And one of the students, PhD students here at the University of Alberta, wrote an essay about him in 2018, and you can read that. It's online. It's not a published thing, but it's online. I hope that he will publish it in due course. But it's very interesting to see how much work Vaidya Acharya did, especially in publishing many other books. So although producing this book that I have, this is actually Acharya's 1938 edition, but reprinted in 2002. So he did the most famous edition of Sushruta, but he did the same for Charaka. So Charaka with the commentary of Chakrapani Datta, I'm looking over there because it's on my other shelf. So Charaka was also his work. And not only, he published many other books, wrote his own books, and published printed editions of also works in other shastras like Rasa Shastra. So a very, very learned, hardworking man, and really created something very special that has been now, 100 years later, we are still using his work every day. So he published the Sushruta-SAMHiTA in 3 editions: 1915, 1931, and 1938. And I will distribute this this slide later on. So if you have a copy, you can just click it, and these editions of his have been scanned so that now you can go to archive.org. And this is his 1915 edition, printed by the Nirnay Sagara Press in Mumbai. And it's beautifully done. And he has an introduction. There he says that he's Yadava Sharman, and then the long table of contents. And I'll just skip into the middle. And this is what it looks like. So this is very familiar to any of us who have studied Sanskrit. We have many books that look just like this. Here is the Mula, and then there is the commentary of Dalhana in the smaller print. We can get a better look at it like that. So it's marvelous that it has been scanned now because it makes it instantly available. So if we go back, he did another edition in 31, and then finally his 3rd and last major edition with the commentary of Dalhana came out in 1938. He did some other things as well, but we're just focused on Sushruta. Even with Sushruta, he did some other things, but we'll just stick with this now. At the beginning, I skipped over something that I just want to rest with, if I can find it again. That's the table of contents. And just before that, this is it, Nivedanam. So here in this introduction to the book, he says down here that where he got his manuscripts. Pustakasya Sangshodhanartam Hasta Likitam Adarsha Pustakam Trayam Uplabdam. So he got 3 manuscripts to use as witnesses for this printed book. And he then tells you Pratamam, Dvitiyam, Tritiyam, and he says where he got them. So this is extremely helpful. This is what we lacked with Madhusudana's copy, but of course now we're almost 100 years later. So the slightly slightly better standards of scholarship are there by the time of Yadava Sharmana Acharya. So he does this in his Nivedanam also to the 31 and the 38 editions. So he gives us a good idea of what materials he's using to make his book. And so he's getting his book. What is printed in this book is based on manuscripts. And so these manuscripts, he tells us what he's using, and I will return to this. But before I do, I just want to, I know that everybody who's come to this talk cares about manuscripts and knows about manuscripts, but I just thought it's very nice to show that there is a growing body of material that's available digitally. So let's have a look. This is going to this place called the archive.org, where if you just search for Sanskrit manuscript, you already get, well, how many? You get 3,400 entries. So lots of material has been photographed. So just at random, here's, I don't know what I will get. Here is the Vedanta Paribhasha. Okay, this is actually a lithograph, a printed lithograph, but a very old one. I just saw something go by. What was that? There's a lot of manuscripts here from the Asiatic Society in London. They have scanned and made available the manuscripts of Wish that are part of their collection. They're all in Malayalam script. So I'm sorry, there we are. No, this is something different. So Kriti-SAMHiTA. Yeah, so this is interesting. We immediately can see that this is something that was written on machine-made paper, probably manufactured in the 19th century. It's not old traditional Indian country paper. It has lines on it, so it's like a book of paper that you could buy in the shop. But the writing is handwritten, and so let's jump to the middle. Yeah, so it's interesting. This is some sort of index. So again, something quite personal. Somebody made their handwritten index, and I've made. I work on a website called Indology Info, which it's nothing very special. But one of the things I try to do is collect useful information when I find it to make it available easily to scholars. And so I've made a list here of some of the digital libraries that provide scans of Indian manuscripts, and then there's some more here. So I mentioned the Royal Asiatic Society. So this is just a quick link that gets you straight to the Wish collection. There are other collections, but here we can see, for example, a copy of the Bhagavata Purana. This is a palm leaf manuscript, very high quality photography, and so it's almost too big to read in one go. So beautiful old manuscripts here, and everything scanned and made available. And there's more here. These are manuscripts from the Raghunatha Temple Library in Jammu, which were originally catalogued by Sir Aurel Stein, and a wonderful, important collection. And Dr. Karan Singh gave his permission for these to be digitized by a colleague of ours, Pandey and Anshma Pandey, and put online. So that's an act of great generosity by him. So these, it turns the pages as if it were a European book. It's better to read it this way. So again, it's wonderful that a lot of materials are already available, but this is a drop in the ocean of of what's out there. It's marvelous to have these things, but this also, we can see the beginning of a big movement now that these manuscripts are going to be digitized. It's so easy to digitize a manuscript today, even with our mobile phone. You can just take photos and they're very high quality. Of course, in the past, we had studios with cameras and tripods. It was quite a complex business, and digital cameras used to be very expensive. But we now have in our own pocket, most of us have a camera that's perfectly good for photographing a manuscript. And then one can share it with the world by putting it into one of these free open repositories. In the past, many families had their own manuscript collections. And so this I thought was quite nice, because this is a list of Sharda and Devanagari manuscripts from Srinagar that are in the residence of Muhammad Ashraf Pirzadah Sahib. So it just again shows you that this gentleman had a lot of manuscripts. Let me make this a little bigger. There we are. Had a lot of manuscripts in just in his own personal collection, and they're all listed here. So, this then takes some time to read it and get an idea of what's really there. For example, I need after this lecture, maybe I will sit down and just look carefully through the list to see if there are any copies of Sushruta. That would be very interesting for me. So, so there are many lists of manuscripts and digitized manuscripts, and a lot of materials are out there. And it's important for us as scholars to organize and index and get hold of this. It's at the moment just like swimming around. So if I want to say, I'm interested in Sushruta, how do I find out? Well, I have to look through all of this material, 3,000 manuscripts on archive.org. It's possible to search by keywords, but very often the spelling is not correct. And so then you have to look through things individually sometimes, because the cataloging information is not perfect. And similarly, you get lists like that one I was just showing you. So it can be slow work to find the manuscripts. There was one great scholar of Greek, Martin West, who said, in the work of editing and working on texts, the most difficult thing is to find out what manuscripts there are. And I must say, I think he was right. So all of these manuscripts were copied by hand. That's what the word means. And the manuscripts that were copied eventually fall to pieces after 200 or 300 years. So before that happens, the family or the library would pay a scribe to come and make a fresh copy. So we have copies of copies of copies of copies. And eventually somebody like Trikamji Yadava Sharman Trikamji Acharya arrives, and he gathers some manuscripts and makes a printed book. And then we sort of forget about the manuscripts. Now we have a book, you go to the shop, you buy the book. And it seems like progress, but it's not really progress fully. It is progress, of course, but there is still work to be done. So if we look closely at Trikamji Acharya's introductions, his Nivedanam, as we saw, he says that in 1915, he used 3 manuscripts. So here in this column, 1915, 1, 2, 3. And if you look more closely at his notes, he says, actually, the first manuscript has Sutra Nidana, Sharira, and Kalpasthana, but did not have Chikitsa or Uttara. And the second manuscript had Chikitsa and Uttara, and the third manuscript had only Uttara. So the Uttarasthana of the Sushruta Samhita is very long. It's almost as long as the rest of the work. So the first 5 sthanas in a way form a unit, and the 6th, the Uttara Tantra, is actually almost like another whole book with over 100, with 66 adhyayas. So it's very long, and it's about, in terms of adhyayas, it's about half as long as the rest of it all put together. This has about 120 adhyayas. So he says he's using 3 manuscripts, but because some sthanas are missing, you see, it's really, if you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adhyaya sthanas, then you could take 1 and 2, although they are different manuscripts, but if you put them together, they form kind of one version of the text. And number 3 is just the Uttara Tantra. So in a way, it sort of comes down to almost like one manuscript, or depending which part of the work you're looking at, 2 manuscripts for the Uttara Tantra. In the beginning of in the Nivedana for his 1931 edition, he's now been able to look at another 9 manuscripts. So the second edition was based on much more evidence. And here we have a picture of what he says in the Nivedana. He also used 2 printed books. There were 2 editions of Sushruta from Calcutta that he looked at. Number 8 here for all of the work, and number 9, which was just the Sutrasthana. So here we see that the manuscripts he's using are even more limited, if you like, that many of them have just one sthana. This has Nidana sthana. These 3 have Sharira sthana, so that is well represented, 4 actually. This one has just Chikitsa sthana, and only number 1 has the Uttara Tantra. And when we get to 1938, he adds another 3 manuscripts. This one, number 1, again, does not have Uttara. This is just the Nidana sthana, and this has got from Sutra to Chikitsa. There are some other details. So if you add it all up, it's 15 manuscripts. But there's only one manuscript, number 5 from 1931, that is actually complete. Unfortunately, he does not give us any details about number 6. He for some reason didn't tell us what that was, so we don't know. It may be complete, but we don't know. So he's used 15 manuscripts, but as you see, each one is only giving information about this sthana or that sthana. So it's not much evidence really for the whole work. So this makes us want to ask, well, he's using 15 manuscripts and they are partial. How many manuscripts are there? So let's ask that. So how do we find out? How do we answer this question? How many manuscripts are there? Well, we have this wonderful, wonderful work by Raghavan that Dr. Gopalakrishnan already referred to, which is so by 1948, Professor Raghavan, who was very much involved as the chairman of the government Sanskrit Commission at the time, which was a big investigation of the state of Sanskrit, both in India and abroad, a very good project, and it published a big report, which is very interesting. And as part of that, he realized that there were lots of manuscripts everywhere in the world, especially in India, but also abroad, and also that there were many catalogues. By the time just after the war, there were already hundreds of catalogues of manuscripts. Because, well, there's a reason. The government in 1868 started a scheme where they would pay for catalogues to be written. So there were lots of catalogues of manuscripts, but that meant that if you wanted to, say, find a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, you had to get the catalogue from Tanjavur, and the catalogue from Trivandrum, and the catalogue from Calcutta, from Pune, from Baroda, from Mumbai, from Delhi, from Srinagar, from everywhere, and look down the list and try to find Bhagavad Gita. So Raghavan thought, as Aufrecht also thought before him, it's time to make an index to everything. And so that's what he did. And that index to all of the catalogues has taken 80 years, almost 80 years. It's now approaching completion, thanks to the yeoman service of Dr. Sinirudha Das, but also his many predecessors amongst the professors of Sanskrit at the University of Madras, Dr. Vizinathan, Dr. Rana, and many others who followed on in the work of Professor Raghavan. So we can look in Raghavan's Catalogus Catalogorum, and if the letter of the alphabet has been published, then we can find where are all of the Bhagavad Gita. So if we look for Sushruta, then I've done that, and this is just a very, very rough. This is just like my notes, but so this is entries from a list of manuscripts in Kathmandu, which is slightly different, and then here we have in volume 39 of the new Catalogus Catalogorum, we have this list. So it starts off with ACW, I don't know, but Adyar, Ahmedabad, Allahabad, and we can go down, and in bold letters here at the end, I'm adding up. So in Baroda, for example, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 manuscripts. Here in Bikaner, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 manuscripts, and so forth. So if you just add up the figures and go down to the end, we get 224. There are some more this includes some in Kerala, but there are some more that one can take into account here and there in places like Kerala and in Nepal and few other places. But Raghavan's list also includes manuscripts in Germany and Britain and other countries. So it is meant to be an international list. So we have got, I should explain that through the work of Martin Gluckman and Sinirudha Das, and with support, financial support as well, a project has been started to make the index of the Catalogus Catalogorum available online. And so if you put in Kriti-SAMHiTA, you can look at this information online as well. So here, this is pretty much the same list that you were just looking at. And having it online is very, very helpful. It takes a little while to learn how to use it, all of these abbreviations. What does Udaipur 1 mean? And you have to learn this. You can look these abbreviations up. But after you've learned how to use it, it's a very important and useful guide. So there is now also the Pandit project, again, which Dr. Gopalakrishnan mentioned. And if we look up in Pandit project, if we look up Sushruta Samhita, this is work that I and my students here at the University of Alberta have done. We have added information about the manuscripts to this database. So this is mostly information taken from Raghavan, but sometimes we've added our own knowledge where we have it. So we have also arranged things in order of date. So we can see the dates of the manuscripts, where they have dates. So where the scribe says, I am sitting on the west bank at the Asi Ghat in Varanasi, and I am copying out, and it's the Shukla Paksha and so on. And he tells us the date. So then we can find it out and put it here. So we see here that mostly the earliest manuscripts are coming from the beginning of the 15th century. Here is Udaipur, Bikaner, Kathmandu. But there is one manuscript, 878 AD, which is really a lot earlier than any other, and it's about 1,000 years old from today. And this is the manuscript that my current research project is focused on, because it's really an outlier in the sense that it's really special. But we've also made, some libraries have made scans, as we saw, available. And where I know about that, I've made a link directly to the scan. So if we go to this manuscript 6696 from Chandigarh, there's a scan of it here on the Chandigarh website. We can accept the risk and go forward. There it is. And so we can immediately consult this manuscript and read it. It's beautifully, beautifully presented. But note again that it's just the Sharira sthana, just one sthana. This is a very, very typical story with the Sushruta sthana, that you find it's just one or two sthanas. So this Pandit project then is increasingly important because it brings together the indexing of Raghavan together with the digitization that is beginning to happen all over the world. And it makes it possible to find out new information. And in fact, we have, I and the University of Alberta participated in a project to on the history of scientific manuscripts in Sanskrit. And they made available to me some $10,000, which was wonderful. And I was able to make this project, Early Science Manuscripts, in which I collaborated with Pandit Project and one of my students, Madhusudan Rimal. We were able to add information. There's a description here about the project. You can read it. It's finished now, but for a while, for about 6 months, we were able to spend some time, and Mr. Rimal did a tremendous amount of work, and I also helped. And so we have information about nearly 3,000 scientific manuscripts, which are covering about 1,400 works and some extracts and some authors and institutions. So, for example, if we go to, let's say, works and see what is that. So, Nakula Chikitsaka, which will be a work about the veterinary care of horses. So if we look at that, then we see Nakula Chikitsaka, and here in Kathmandu, there is a manuscript. And I can click on that, and then I get details of that manuscript, that it's shelf mark, it's got a microfilm and number of folios, 64. And it contains the Nakula Chikitsaka, so we can go back to that. And this is a work on Vaidya Shastra. And if I click on that, then we can get many other works on Vaidya Shastra, including, we can search for all of them or just see the most recent ones. Here is the Shashi Lekha, which is a work by Indu. And we can click on Indu and find out what other things he wrote. There's a manuscript of his Shashi Lekha in Calcutta. Of course, there are many more, but we haven't put them in yet. So this is a growing project on scientific manuscripts. So how is the time? It's okay. So there exist approximately 224 manuscripts of Sushruta, although they are partial. So this is a very big, to get them, to read them, they are often in Devanagari, but by no means always. So one often has to learn other alphabets. It's a big project and we need a new way of working. And we have today got a lot of assistance from computers. So the first thing is that every manuscript is slightly different because scribes make mistakes and then the copies of those manuscripts contain those mistakes and they add new ones. And then some good pundit will get a manuscript and he will correct some of those errors. So the mistakes go away, but maybe then there are new ones. So it's a long and complicated story. I don't know if you've played a game, children play the game of Chinese whispers, where you get a lot of youngsters in a circle and you say something to the first one and they whisper to the second, and everybody whispers it around the room until it comes back. And the last person in the chain says it out loud, and it's usually completely different from what the first person said. And that's a little bit what's going on with manuscripts. Of course, it's not as bad as Chinese whispers, but changes creep in, as you would expect. So if you write down all these changes, let's say you take all these manuscripts together and write them out and make like a spreadsheet with all of the differences, where one manuscript says dosha, another one says disha, and another one says doshe. So you have some differences and you keep track of all of that. It's a very detailed job. But if you feed all that information into a computer, the computer can now tell you how the manuscripts are related to each other. And this is very interesting because this is software that is actually developed not for Sanskrit studies, but for evolutionary biology and for the analysis of ancient and modern DNA. So if you were working in a scientific laboratory on the discovery of DNA, you need software that will help you to distinguish, for example, the DNA of a horse from a mule and a donkey. So you have the pattern of their DNA, and they are all descended from some ancient ancestor, the sort of the mother of all horses, or everyone in the Equidae family. And then you need, software to allow you to trace all of the differences in the DNA. And it turns out that that is structurally exactly the same problem as trying to understand how manuscripts are related by studying all these small differences in them. So we are very lucky that we have sophisticated software from the field of evolutionary biology that helps us with our problem. So the software can do this. These are, in fact, manuscripts of the Kriti-SAMHiTA. And this work was done by my colleague, Dr. Philip Maas, who did this work while he was at the University of Vienna. He is currently at the University of Halle. He's a professor there. So each of the, let me make it a bit bigger. Each of the leaves at the end of the branches is a manuscript. This is one, I think, from Jaipur. This is Chandigarh. This is Udaipur. Maybe JP is Jaipur. That's probably Jammu, and so on. So you can go, V is Varanasi. So what the computer can do is tell you that Udaipur and Jaipur are very similar to each other, but different from everything else from that join onwards. So they are closely related. Similarly, Baroda and whatever JN is, those two are somewhat similar to each other. And everything on this branch is somewhat similar to each other, and they all share the fact that they are different from all the rest. So all of these manuscripts are the Kriti-SAMHiTA, but they fall into groups that have more or less similarity with each other. What the computer cannot do is tell you what is old and what is new. It can't tell you where this graph is rooted, what is the original. So that is work that you have to do using historical and philological study, thinking about the dates of the manuscripts, the handwriting, where they were found, and thinking about what they say. So that is a task for philology. So once you've done that, and once you've eliminated all the manuscripts that are copies of each other, so let's take, for example, this branch. This manuscript, AP2, is similar to all of these, and it's joined at the same place there on the tree, which means to say that all of these, P3, so that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those 7 manuscripts have the same weight or are the same distance from the root as AP. So AP is a single manuscript, and it is as important as all of these 7. So in a way, one manuscript equals 7 manuscripts in terms of the evidence it can give us. So using some techniques of reasoning, one can decide that some of these manuscripts, you don't need to look at them because they don't actually contain any new information. That there are some manuscripts like AP2, and for example, these two, M, K, and C, these are very close to the root, and therefore they have tremendous value and carry more information than some of these other ones out at the end. So using this kind of reasoning, you can eliminate manuscripts, which is very important because you can't, looking at 50 or 60 manuscripts is going to take a long time. When you think you're looking at every time a scribe made an error, you're looking at every akshara, it's a huge job. So it's very important to be able to eliminate manuscripts that do not have fresh information. So here is the elimination, and we are able to get this down to 10 manuscripts. And in this project, we call these the Golden 10. So this is one from Kathmandu, and this is one from Baroda, this is from Varanasi, this is from, I can't remember, maybe Benares, but I'm not sure. So this is Chandigarh. So these 10 manuscripts actually give you all the information you would find if you looked at all of them. And so you can trace the tree back to a Kashmiri version and an Eastern version, probably Bengali. And you can continue to work in this way and develop an understanding of how the text of Charaka evolved. So every manuscript is different, and sorting all this out is what we call critical editing. So we have started a project here. I'm very grateful to the Canadian government who approved an application that I made a couple of years ago in the middle of the pandemic for funding to do this project. And you can look at the website, it's sushrutaproject.org, and you'll find this and more information there. So what are we doing? The problem, and I'm running out of time now, so I can't spend too much time on this. I can't read that with you, but what it says is that when you sit down to read Sushruta, you find that there are many problems. There are pieces of the Sanskrit that don't really seem to be grammatical sometimes, or don't quite make you, it doesn't feel right. A lot of it is okay, but there are many places where it doesn't feel correct. And I am not the first person to say this. The commentators, Dalhana in the 12th century, and especially Chandrata in the 1,000 years ago, written at the turn of the 11th century, Chandrata's Sushrutapata Shruti already was a work of criticism where he was saying that the text that he'd received had many variations in it, and he was trying to sort it out. So many scholars for a long time have felt that the Sushruta text had suffered in some way. So in 2007, two scholars, Dimitrov and Tamot, discovered this new manuscript that I mentioned already that was sitting in the library, the Kesar library in Kathmandu, that is from the year 878, from the reign of King Manadeva. And, sorry, not 77, it's 878. And this is what it looks like at the top here. And it's a beautiful old manuscript written in the 9th century Nepalese alphabet. And we have also found another manuscript in Kathmandu in the National Archives, this manuscript, which is from the 16th century, but the text of this is almost identical to this. So this must be a copy, but probably a copy of a copy, but it's in the same tradition. So the readings of this work, of this manuscript, support this as well. So although it is many hundreds of years later, it is also a witness to the same version of Sushruta. And so this is very exciting to find such an old witness, and indeed, even a preliminary study of this has shown us that it is a somewhat different text, and it is also somewhat more correct. So it's actually wonderful. I was reading with my colleagues just last night And there was a sentence which in the printed book, it's very odd. You can't, it's grammatically incorrect. And but in the manuscript, it's correct. And, we were saying, yay, the manuscript gives us it's actually much easier to read. It's difficult to read because it's in an old handwriting, but in terms of the grammatical correctness, it's much better. So I'm hoping that out of this study of this project, we will eventually be able to produce a more clear and older and more correct version of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA. So we are transcribing the manuscripts. I have a team of people who are mentioned on the website. Let me share their names. Sushruta Project. So the project team, the research assistants, these people, Madhusudan, Dipro, Jane, Vandana, Harshal, Devayani, Paras, and Gauri, are all working very hard on typing out these manuscripts. So they're sitting at their computers, they've learned this old script, and they are transcribing the materials. And they are using a standard way of doing this called the text encoding guidelines, which we could talk about another time. And we are using this tool, Saktumiva, to collate everything. And we are, that is to say, to bring together all of the different manuscripts in one screen. And we are developing a provisional edition, which is available today. So, I mean, everything we do, we are making it public immediately. So, for example, if we take the Kalpasthana, if you click on here, then this is being displayed from this system called Saktumiva, and it allows us to see our provisional edition, and then we can choose to show the manuscripts as well. And it will show them on the right-hand side as what in the profession we call an apparatus criticus. And this is open to the public. Anybody can look at this today, and whatever we do, it's made available immediately on the same day. And you can look at it in Devanagari if that is more preferable, or in Malayalam, or whatever is the easiest script for you. So this material, as soon as we produce something new, it's immediately available on the internet. So if there is some shloka that you want to check, you can check. I must bring this to the end. So let me just say very quickly some of the biggest discoveries that we've made so far. First of all, every section of every adhyaya of Sushruta begins with a statement, Atahato Annapana Raksha Kalpamo. This is a bad example, but it begins with a statement saying, Yatha Uvacha Dhanvantari. And so there are something like 200 adhyayas, and everyone begins Yathovacha Dhanvantari, that this science of medicine in Sushruta was given to the world by Lord Dhanvantari. In this old Nepalese tradition, that is missing, that is not there. It simply begins Ata Ataha, Dirgha Jivatiyam, and so on, and then it goes straight into the chapter. In fact, it says that the teaching of Sushruta is coming not from Dhanvantari, but from Divodasa, who is the king of Kashi. So that is a very big issue. It's very important that sometime between the 9th century and the later manuscripts and today, some Pandit decided to place the story of the Sushruta-SAMHiTA in a frame and attribute it to the god Dhanvantari. But in this 9th century manuscript, we are finding an older version which is from before that time. So we have to think, what does it mean? And how did that happen? And so our project has published a short article about this, which is last year came out, in which we are thinking about this question. So next is that the commentator Dalhana knows about our Nepalese recension, or what we call the Nepalese version. It was also known in Bengal, and actually I think Dalhana is working in Mathura. So in the 12th century in Mathura, he knew about this version of the work. That has been an interesting discovery. We've also published an article about that. Next, we found that this old, what we call the Nepalese version, it's really not Nepalese because it's North Indian in a way, but we have a manuscript from Nepal. But it contains fewer verses. It's a little bit shorter. And something we discovered recently is that when there are shlokas missing, very often they are later, when we look in the printed book at what was it that's missing, we find they've been taken from Charaka. So again, somebody decided that some parts of the text needed expanding, and they added material from Charaka. So we are still investigating that, and my colleague Andrei Klebanov will give a talk about that in Vienna in July, and I hope that will lead to a publication. And then one of my favorite parts of the Kriti-SAMHiTA is the story about the poisoned virgins, this idea that a young girl may be given poison in very small amounts during her childhood so that her skin and her body and her hair becomes poisonous. And then a king may send this girl as a gift, as a bride to a foreign king who is his enemy, and say, here is a beautiful young woman to be your wife. And when the foreign king marries her and has sex with her, then he is poisoned and he dies. So it is a kind of assassination. And this story became very, very famous right the way through medieval Europe, and in many sources in Arabic, in Persian, and in Latin. And it became a very famous worldwide story. And the oldest version we have is in Sushruta, which is fascinating. However, it's there in the printed version. It's there in these, this later version of Sushruta, but it's absent in the Nepalese version. So I'm very sad about that, because I think it's a striking story, and I'm sorry that it's not present in the old version from the Nepalese version. So there's lots of work to be done in the future. As you see, we are working just on this oldest manuscript, but in the future, we have to finish what we're doing, and then there will be more work to be done to look at all of these other manuscripts and bring them together. And finally, the last job we want to do is to read the text and think about what it says and what it means. That is the goal. All of this technology and all of this study and scholarship, the goal of it is to actually read what the great sage Sushruta said and think about what he said and try to understand his thoughts and his ideas and his concepts. That is what we're all aiming at. So thank you very much. I've spoken for a little bit longer than I should have done, but let me finish with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Wujastyk, for such a fascinating, totally fascinating presentation on the complex. Is there a problem? Yeah, on the complex topic of critical editing, the different phases of it, how you identify the manuscripts, how you search them out, how you collate them, and the different editions. So one question to you. This 224, what is this Kriti-SAMHiTA project about? You said that you're working on different critical editions. So are you identifying some of the manuscripts and then transcribing them and making editions, or are you making a comprehensive edition with all the manuscripts consulted?
There we are. No, we are having to be laser focused on this Nepalese manuscript, just the one manuscript together. Well, actually 3 manuscripts, because we have the old one from 878. We have that second one from the 1543 that I showed on the screen. And there is in fact a third manuscript also in Kathmandu that is of the same recension. That it again supports this old, they're basically all supporting this old material, and that we should look at it. But here's the issue. It's slow, difficult, and in the end, expensive work. And when I applied to the Canadian Research Foundation, the Social Studies and Humanities Research Council, for the money for this project, I had to make the application, first of all, sound like something that could be done in 3 or 4 years. And secondly, that it had to have a hook. It had to be something that was attractive and exciting and would appeal to a committee that really didn't know anything about India much. Perhaps I'm being rude, they do know a lot, but nevertheless, it had to be something that was obviously attractive. And I could say, and with my hand on my heart, we have discovered just recently a 1,000-year-old manuscript, this unique object that allows us to travel in time back 1,000 years. And so I could make the project something that I was lucky enough that they said yes, and they gave me the money to do this for 3 or 4 years. So although one's imagination is big, in the end, very often it comes down to the art of what is possible, as you know very much, having run many projects yourself. And so it was possible to get money for this. In the long run, we must look at all of these manuscripts, and I think it's even very likely, I would say almost certain, that we will find more manuscripts that support the early version of the Kriti-SAMHiTA, and we will also find others that support intermediate versions of the work. So we will learn a lot more about how it evolved and how it changed and why those changes took place. That's going to be a fascinating story, but it's not something that we can do in our project.
Perhaps what is said about the story of stories also is something that you could record for other people. It will be very important for people to know who are taking this kind of serious study of a single text. But also your illustration of that unrooted tree, and I think the other one were very, 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 things are made very clear with that kind of description. Thank you so much. There are some questions to you. One is from Dr. Oscar Pujol, Sanskritist. He thanks you for a wonderful presentation on manuscript resources and asks if the presentation will be available for further consultation. I think there is more to me. I think, of course, you could give are you planning to give a more comprehensive?
Well, I think this is being recorded, isn't it? So
yes, it is.
It will be for you to decide how you use it. But the slides that I showed are just a PDF file, and the links in there are hot in the sense you can click, as you saw me doing. So yes. I will send you, as soon as we've finished today, I will send this to you, and I will leave it in your capable hands to decide if you want to share it or what to do. But from my point of view, yes, everything is available. This is also a point that I couldn't make, I'm not so much in the lecture, but if you go to the sushrutaproject.org, everything is publicly available. So, for example, last night we had a seminar for 2 hours. We were discussing some verses in the Kalpasthana, and we made some corrections and so forth. I immediately have uploaded that to the internet so that everything we said last night is there now for everybody to see. So it is somewhat technical. It requires some time to learn how we are working and so on. But we are making everything open from the first day, from now. So it also means that everything is somewhat imperfect because we are showing our research as we do it. And that is a little bit, it makes you a little nervous as a scholar, because we are used to the pattern where you work on a piece of writing or a book and you polish and polish, make it perfect. And then finally, after 10 years, it's published. And then immediately you see an error on page 1. But it happens to all of us. But this idea that you keep everything back and at the end you publish it, you know, with computers and the internet, everything is changing. So
yes,
we are making everything open from as we do it. So you can enter the workshop and see what we're doing straight away. And so, you know, nothing is in the mushti, in the closed fist of the teacher.
So work in progress, and it progresses
Yes.
through. Yeah, that's wonderful. One more question to you from Priya Namra. You have talked about the connections between Charaka and Sushruta-SAMHiTA. How is the Bhela-SAMHiTA related to the two?
Bhela-SAMHiTA is a very important text, and there is a research project headed by my colleague, Professor Yamashita, Tsutomu Yamashita in Japan, who has written already many articles about Bhela and is working on the text. We have very little evidence surviving for the Bhela-SAMHiTA. We have a single manuscript, a palm leaf manuscript written in the Telugu alphabet that is in the Tanjore Maharaja Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjavur, and I have held it in my hands, which was a very holy and special moment for me, very exciting. So, you know, just very carefully, of course, but I had that privilege to see the original thing. So there is one other fragment of the work that survives from Central Asia that was discovered in one of those exploration expeditions by either Oral Stein. Anyway, Professor Yamashita has that as well, but that is only just a very small part of the text. So when the work has, from this one manuscript, it has been printed and even translated into English. I have the book behind me there on the shelf. But it's very imperfect because the manuscript is somewhat damaged and because a lot more work needs to be done to understand the Sanskrit correctly. But at least we have something. We have a rough printed version of it. And when you read it, what you find is that it is very closely related to the Charaka Samhita, but it is different. But it's more similar to Charaka than to Sushruta.
Okay. So maybe you might get more as investigation happens more and more. Maybe you may get more copies, more manuscripts from. Also, maybe the National Manuscripts Mission itself may have more data if you want to look at that. Yes,
that would be marvelous. Professor Yamashita, of course, he's traveled extensively across India and spent many years looking. But yes, you never know. India is an extraordinary country and in some ways very conservative. And some places, well, I don't need to tell you, you yourself launched a project to investigate manuscripts in Orissa. And Orissa is a place where very old things have survived. And the same can be said for Kerala, in fact, for many parts of India. So we can hope that maybe more may come one day. Since the one manuscript we have is in Telugu script, one would feel maybe Andhra Pradesh might be a place where some family has got a Bhela manuscript. Who knows?
Right, that's true. So any more questions are coming through? Could you read that aloud?
It's a wonderful presentation, sir. I know there are many manuscripts like the Charak Samhita and Kashyap Samhita, on which Pandit Hemraj Sharma wrote. Deeply knowledgeable preface on the history of Ayurveda. Are you doing anything on that?
The sound was not perfect, but I think it was a question about Kashyapa Samhita. No,
Right.
we are not. We're not working on Kashyapa-Samhita at the moment. As far as I know, only 3 manuscripts of Kashyapa-Samhita survive, and one of them was the basis. 1 or 2 of them were the basis of the publication by a noted scholar of the 19th century, Hemaraja Sharman, who worked in Kathmandu, I think, or maybe not. No, I may be wrong about his location, but he produced a printed version of the Kashyapa-Samhita, which is extremely useful and important. But I'm not working on that at the moment. It's a marvelous thing. Somebody should look at it. It's a very unique and important work. But you know, part of the as leading this project on Sushruta, I have had to learn to curb my instincts, that if we're going to have some success, we have to be very focused on one thing.
Yes, that's true. But I think within that focus, I think you've gone everywhere, gone around quite a lot to have this much of comprehensive, data that you have collected all these years. Is extremely fascinating and wonderful.
Well, partly because I'm so old. if you live for a number of years, then after a while your knowledge accumulates. If you remain interested.
Know about that. But thank you so much, Prof. Wujastyk. It was a wonderful lecture, and I'm sure everyone has enjoyed it. And then, like I said, when we get I think many people have also seen it in the YouTube channel also. So we will.
Okay.
So it's not just this, but others also have seen it. And when we get the transcript of this, we'll get back to you. And thank you so much again.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And thank you to everyone in the audience for coming to listen. Thank you very much. And I wish you great mangala and great good luck for your project.
Thank you so much. Thanks again. Thank you. Yeah. You can leave now.